Today's question comes from Sarah in Canada. My husband and I earn about $5,000 a month and we're $30,000 in debt. We've been looking for a new rental situation, which is challenging in the current market. Out of the blue, one of my husband's clients offered to let us live in one of her homes for $500 a month. My husband will still get paid normally when doing work for her. She is a real rags to riches story and is incredibly generous. And for the first time, we don't have to be scared about whether we can make rent or bills, and our debt will be paid off quickly. My question is this. When you've always been treading water to keep your head just barely above it, how do you learn to kick back and float? How do you let yourself feel safe and breathe for the first time in years? There's a lot in this question, Dave. Here's my thoughts off the top of my head. There is a difference between letting yourself feel safe and breathing and kicking back and floating.
Agreed.
And if you kick back and float, you will never feel safe and you will never be able to breathe. And so I don't want you to ever, quote unquote, kick back and float. I wish there was a sexier way to say this, but you got to practice. You got to practice reminding yourself. You and your husband come up with new words that you give for each other when the other person's starting to get amped up, and you say, hey, let's take a breath. My wife and I did this for years. Anybody healing from trauma does this. You practice it, and you call it out with each other, and over time, your body adjusts to being safe. And I'll also tell you, if you're living in a special rent situation, you're not safe. You got to save up some money and get yourself your own place, because this isn't going to be this way forever. That's my thoughts.
So when we're coaching people with their money, and they're in a highly stressed out, freaked out, they're behind on their bills, their car's about to be repoed, they got a lot of debt. If the first 10 years I did it, it caught me off guard. It would catch me off guard. It no longer does, just because of experience, that when people start doing a budget, and then they use the money that they've got, and they say, we've got this much money, and on this date we'll have that fixed, on that date we'll have that fixed, on that date we'll have that debt paid off, on that date we'll be debt-free, on that date we'll have our emergency fund, based on projecting the budget that's in front of me, and they do their budget for the first time, and they're able to extrapolate their future. None of the work is done. Their situation has not changed. Only their ability to see their way out of their situation with a system has changed. That is where you can breathe and feel safe. And their stress level goes down 90% just by laying out the freaking plan.
There's some research that says people, with the moment you make your first counseling appointment, you start to feel better.
Well, and people cancel their counseling appointment.
Because they feel better.
Yeah, they feel better. Like they have a big fight, book a marriage counseling appointment, and then they make up.
And then they don't get the help they need.
Then they don't get the help, and they cancel the appointment. It happens all the time. Yeah. The same thing happens when you do a budget. Even though you still have your bills are out there screwed up, everything's still up in the air. It's still a mess, but now you can see how you're going to get out. The stress level drops 90%, and that's when you can breathe and feel safe. So you need to project this temporary rent situation that you have out. And say, we're going to be out of debt here, and we're going to move out of this voluntarily before the generosity of the sweet lady runs out, and you change your narrative about the way you look at her, because suddenly she actually wants to collect rent. And so...
and all that's different than kicking back and floating.
Yeah,
doing
but you
nothing,
feel
right?
safe because of your plan. You breathe because of your plan, because you can... We have a thing we're doing here. We're working the baby steps. We're on a budget. We can see the progress. We can see a future that is bright. There's a vision for our life, and your stress level goes down, and you breathe and feel safe. But you're not kicking back and floating. You're busting it with great intensity.
That's right.
So yeah, I agree with you to separate those two statements, and I think you're wanting something you should probably never get, which is to do nothing.
Don't ever
want to do nothing.
Strive to do nothing.
Yeah.
Resting is not nothing. Resting
there's
is
no
not
joy
neutral.
in it. There's no joy in it.
You got to rest, and rest isn't. That's not what we're saying. And you got to sleep. It's not what we're saying. Those are critical parts to being well. But you got to be intentional about rest. You got to be intentional about sleep.
You feel safe and breathe while you're getting crap done.
Absolutely. That's how you feel safe. Is having purpose and working towards something.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
That's a good point. There's this empty nothingness thing. I mean, these chambers that they've got at these things now, where you can go float in
Oh,
the dark
yeah.
and all that
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, yeah.
It's that is not. I mean, it's fine to do, and I'm not mad at it. It's nothing like that.
It's not a way of life.
But you don't want your life to be that.
No.
You want your life to be, I'm climbing a mountain.
And
My life is, I'm going on a hike.
Pat Lencioni are talking about that. Our whole culture's set up for that. The goal
We
is
work to do nothing.
To do nothing. To get to the end of the day and sit in your recliner and kick it back so you can do nothing.
No.
What a lame, terrible
Which is why
life.
people die right after they retire.